Airports are the ultimate purgatory. They are liminal spaces, suspended somewhere between the life you are desperately trying to escape and the life you are terrified to return to. You sit in these sterile, artificially lit corridors, breathing recycled air, surrounded by thousands of people, and yet you have never been more profoundly alone. It was a Tuesday evening in late November, and a massive winter storm had paralyzed the entire eastern seaboard. Flights out of London Heathrow were grounded, indefinitely delayed, creating a sprawling ecosystem of stranded, exhausted travelers. I was sitting at a high-end terminal bar, staring into the amber depths of a heavily poured scotch. The ice cubes clinked against the crystal glass, a hollow, mocking sound. My name is Arthur, and exactly 4 days ago, I had discovered that my entire existence was a meticulously constructed lie. I hadn't been looking for it. That's the tragic irony of betrayal. It rarely announces itself with a dramatic confrontation. It slips into your life through a careless oversight. An iPad left unlocked on the kitchen island. An email notification that flashes across the screen for just a fraction of a second. The name on the email was Julian. He was a contractor we had hired to renovate our sprawling, historic home in the affluent suburbs of Boston. My wife, Eleanor, had insisted on Julian. She said he had vision. She said he understood the soul of the house. Sitting in the sterile glow of the airport bar, I took another burning sip of scotch. The memory of those emails playing on a continuous, agonizing loop in my mind. They weren't just having an affair. They were laughing at me. They were mocking my long business trips, my predictable habits, my blind, pathetic devotion. They were actively planning a future funded entirely by my wealth, discussing the easiest ways to liquidate my assets once I was out of the picture. I was drowning in a toxic cocktail of grief, humiliation, and a dark, simmering rage that I didn't even know I was capable of possessing. I was so consumed by the violent theater of my own mind that I barely registered the woman taking the empty stool next to me. She ordered a dry martini. Her voice was smooth, low, and entirely devoid of the frantic, anxious energy that infected the rest of the stranded terminal. I glanced at her through my peripheral vision. She was striking, but in a severe, almost predatory way. Pale skin, dark hair cut in a sharp, unforgiving bob, and eyes that were a pale, icy blue. She caught me looking. She didn't look away. Instead, she offered a small, knowing smile, as if she could read the catastrophic damage written all over my face. "You look like a man who is actively hoping this storm never clears," she said, her voice cutting effortlessly through the ambient noise of the crowded bar. Normally, I would have offered a polite, dismissive excuse and turned back to my drink. I am not the kind of man who unburdens his soul to strangers, but there was something deeply disarming about the anonymity of the airport. We were two ghosts in a transient space, entirely disconnected from the consequences of the real world. I looked at her, the alcohol loosening the heavy iron vault in my self-control. "If this storm doesn't clear," I replied, my voice raspy and hollow, "I don't have to go home. And if I don't go home, I don't have to look at my wife and pretend that I don't know she's sleeping with the man building our sunroom." The words hung in the air, heavy and lethal. I expected her to recoil. I expected the standard uncomfortable platitudes, the forced sympathy, the awkward shifting of posture, but she didn't flinch. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her martini, her icy blue eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "That is a very specific kind of pain," she said quietly. "The betrayal of the sanctuary. It's not just about the sex, is it? It's about the fact that they're doing it in the house you paid for, on the bed you sleep in. It's the sheer, unadulterated disrespect." It was a terrifyingly accurate assessment. It was as if she had reached directly into my chest and touched the exposed nerve of my agony. Yes, I breathed, the anger flaring hot in my chest. It's the arrogance of it. They think I'm a fool. They think I'm just an ATM providing the funding for their little romantic tragedy. She turned slightly on her stool, facing me completely. "So," she asked, her tone entirely conversational, as if she were inquiring about the weather in Boston. "What are you going to do about it? Divorce is messy. It splits the assets. It gives them exactly what they want. They get half your money, and they get each other." "I know." I ground out, my knuckles turning white around my glass. "I've thought about it. I've thought about ruining them financially. I've thought about darker things." I let out a bitter, self-deprecating laugh. "But I'm a venture capitalist, not a criminal. I don't have it in me to do what I actually want to do." "And what is it that you actually want to do, Arthur?" The question was a velvet trap. I looked into her pale, unblinking eyes, the absolute absence of judgment acting as a dangerous narcotic. "I want them dead," I whispered, the confession slipping out of me before I could stop it. "I want her dead." The silence that followed stretched for 3 agonizing seconds. The ambient noise of the terminal seemed to fade into a dull, distant roar. She didn't call for security. She didn't laugh it off as a dark joke. She leaned in, the faint, metallic scent of her perfume washing over me. "I don't think you're crazy, Arthur," she whispered, her voice a deadly, hypnotic purr. "In fact, I think it's the most rational thing you've said all night. Some people are just a rot on the world. Some people are the kind worth killing. The psychological endurance required to live with a person you are actively conspiring to murder is a profoundly isolating, agonizing experience. You become a hostage in your own home, performing a pantomime of affection while every instinct screams in revulsion." I returned to Boston on a Thursday morning. The sprawling, historic colonial house looked exactly as I had left it, yet it felt entirely alien. It was a beautiful, meticulously curated tomb. Eleanor greeted me in the foyer. She was wearing a soft cashmere sweater, her blonde hair perfectly styled, smelling faintly of lavender and expensive moisturizer. She wrapped her arms around my neck, pressing a warm, lingering kiss to my cheek. "I missed you," she murmured, her voice a flawless imitation of devotion. "The house is so empty when you travel." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the lie nearly brought me to my knees. I smelled the lavender, but my mind supplied the phantom scent of Julian's cologne. I looked at her perfect, smiling face and saw the mocking, cruel emails flashing behind her eyes. I forced my muscles to relax. I placed my hands on her waist, suppressing a violent shudder. "I missed you too." I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in psychological compartmentalization. I went to my venture capital firm. I attended board meetings. I reviewed portfolios. I operated with chilling, detached efficiency. My mind entirely split into 2 distinct realities. In one reality, I was Arthur, the successful, predictable executive. In the other, I was the architect of my wife's demise, waiting for a signal from a phantom named Miranda. Julian, the contractor, was a constant, abrasive presence in the house. He was overseeing construction of a massive, glass-walled sunroom at the rear of the property. He was a ruggedly handsome man in his late 30s, possessing the kind of effortless, physical charisma that men like me, men who lived in spreadsheets and boardrooms, often lacked. He treated me with a deferential, almost patronizing respect when I was around. "Morning, Mr. Vance," he would say, wiping drywall dust from his jeans. "Making good progress on the framing today." I would nod, offering a tight, polite smile, watching the subtle, microscopic glances exchange between him and Eleanor when they thought I wasn't looking. The way she lingered just a fraction of a second too long when handing him a cup of coffee. The way his eyes tracked the movement of her hips as she walked out of the room. It was a daily, agonizing torture, but it was also the fuel I needed. Every stolen glance, Every whispered conversation I caught fragments of reinforced the cold, hard logic of the airport bar. They were parasites. They were the kind worth killing. The signal came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in my corner office overlooking the Boston skyline when an unmarked envelope was delivered by a courier. Inside was a single blank piece of heavy cardstock and a small silver key. It was the key to a locker at the Amtrak station. I left the office immediately, the adrenaline spiking sharp and hot in my veins. The train station was a chaotic swirl of commuters. I found a locker, inserted the key, and pulled out a burner phone and a typed set of instructions. The window is this weekend. You have a conference in Chicago. You will board your flight on Friday evening. You will check into your hotel. You will establish a digital and physical footprint. On Saturday night, while you are having dinner with your clients, Julian will come to the house. He always comes to the house when you are out of town. I will already be inside. Leave the side door of the garage unlocked. Do not deviate from your itinerary. Do not call her. The universe is taking out the trash. I stare at the slip of paper. The terrifying reality of the imminent violence crashing over me. It was no longer a theoretical conversation in an airport lounge. The machinery was in motion. The gears were turning, and there was absolutely no way to stop them without destroying myself in the process. I flew to Chicago on Friday evening. I checked into the Drake Hotel, making sure to engage in a long, memorable conversation with the concierge. I swiped my credit card at the hotel bar. I created an impenetrable wall of alibis, meticulously documenting my physical presence hundreds of miles away from the slaughter that was about to occur in my own home. On Saturday night, I sat in a high-end steakhouse, surrounded by aggressive, loud venture capitalists discussing market trends. I drank expensive Cabernet, smiled at the appropriate intervals, and nodded at jokes I didn't hear. My physical body was in Chicago, but my mind was entirely tethered to the dark, silent rooms of my house in Boston. I checked my watch under the table. 10 p.m. Julian would be arriving. He would park his truck a street over, slipping through the trees at the back of the property to avoid the cameras. He would use the spare key Eleanor had hidden under the heavy ceramic planter on the patio. He would walk into the kitchen, expecting the warm, eager embrace of my wife. He would not be expecting Miranda. He would not be expecting the cold, lethal precision of a predator waiting in the dark. I imagined the confrontation. I imagined the sudden, terrifying realization in their eyes when they understood that the oblivious, pathetic husband had outmaneuvered them. I waited for the burner phone in my pocket to vibrate, signaling that the deed was done. I waited for the closure, but as the hours ticked by, the phone remained dead, silent, and heavy in my pocket. The silence stretched into the early hours of the morning, mutating from anticipation into a cold, suffocating dread. Something had gone wrong. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the statement paralyzed me, the kind worth killing. She said it with the casual, empirical certainty of a doctor diagnosing a terminal illness. I stared at her, desperately searching her face for a trace of irony, a flicker of dark humor, but her expression was an impenetrable mass of absolute sincerity. "You're joking," I stammered, my heart suddenly hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The alcohol in my system instantly crystallized into cold, sharp adrenaline. "I never joke about necessary things," she replied, picking up the olive from her martini glass by the toothpick and examining it. "Think about it, Arthur. What does Eleanor actually contribute to the world? She is a parasite. She consumes your resources, destroys your peace of mind, and plots your ruin with a man you hired. If she were a diseased limb, you would amputate her to save the rest of your body. Why should a diseased human being be treated any differently? Because it's murder," I whispered fiercely, looking around the crowded bar to ensure no one was listening to this insane conversation. "Because there are laws. because people go to prison for the rest of their lives for thinking exactly like this. She smiled, a thin, chilling stretching of her lips. People go to prison because they are emotional, because they act out of passion, they leave messes, and they possess a fundamental, crippling flaw, guilt. They subconsciously want to be caught to relieve the psychological pressure of the act. But if you remove the emotion, if you view it simply as a logistical problem that requires a permanent solution, the mechanics of getting away with it are surprisingly straightforward. She extended her hand across the polished mahogany bar. "My name is Miranda, by the way." I shook her hand reflexively. Her skin was cool, her grip firm and uncompromising. I was sitting next to Psychopath. Every rational instinct I possessed was screaming at me to pay my tab, grab my carry-on bag, and run to the furthest gate in the terminal. But I didn't move. The gravitational pull of her logic was terrifyingly seductive. She was offering me a key to a locked door I had only dared to stare at in my darkest, most private moments of despair. "You talk about this," I said, my voice barely audible, "as if you have experience in the matter." Miranda's pale eyes locked onto mine. The absolute stillness of her gaze was paralyzing. Let's just say that I have a very strong philosophical belief in the concept of cosmic balancing. When the universe refuses to take out the trash, sometimes you have to put on the gloves and do it yourself. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You said you don't have it in you, Arthur. You are a man of spreadsheets and risk assessments. You don't have the stomach for the violence of the act. But I do." The implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "Why?" I asked, completely bewildered. "Why would you possibly offer to do this? You don't know me. You don't know her. What could you possibly gain from involving yourself in my nightmare?" "A project," she said simply. "A challenge, and perhaps a small percentage of the assets you save by not going through a brutal divorce. But mostly, Arthur, I am offering because I despise people like Eleanor. I despise the cruel, entitled parasites of the world who believe they can destroy good people without consequence. Consider me an instrument of karma." It was a pact forged in the sterile, neon-lit purgatory of an airport bar. Two strangers, separated by geography and history, suddenly bound together by a shared, lethal objective. We spent the next 4 hours, as the blizzard raged outside the massive plate glass windows, dissecting the anatomy of my life. I gave her the layout of my home. I gave her Eleanor's routines. I gave her the details of Julian's contracting schedule. I handed over the blueprints of my existence to a woman I had met 3 hours ago, watching as she meticulously cataloged the information, searching for the fatal flaw in Eleanor's routine. By the time the flight board finally flashed green, signaling that the storm had broken and flights were boarding, the architecture of the murder was complete. It was brilliant in its simplicity. It relied on my absence, a stage break-in, and predictable, arrogant habits of the cheating lovers. We stood up from the bar. The ambient noise of the terminal rushed back in, breaking the hypnotic, terrifying bubble we had occupied. "Go home, Arthur," Miranda said, pulling her sleek, expensive coat over her shoulders. "Act exactly as you normally would. Be the loving, oblivious husband. Do not change a single pattern of your behavior. The success of this operation relies entirely on your ability to be perfectly, unremarkably mundane." "And you?" I asked, a sudden, cold wave of reality washing over me. The alcohol was fading, leaving behind the stark, terrifying truth of what I had just agreed to. "I will be in Boston next week," she replied, turned to walk toward her gate. She didn't look back. "I will be in touch. Just remember, the hardest part isn't the act itself. The hardest part is living with the silence afterward." I watched her disappear into the sea of exhausted travelers, a ghost fading into the crowd. I boarded my flight, the heavy engines roaring to life, carrying me back across the Atlantic. I was returning to a home that had become a crime scene in waiting. I was flying back to a woman I had already sentenced to death in my mind. The transformation was complete. I was no longer a victim. I was an accomplice. To understand the catastrophic failure of the plan, you must shift the lens. You must step out of the paranoid, compartmentalized mind of a betrayed husband and step into the cold, calculated, terrifyingly lucid reality of the predator. Miranda was not a vigilante seeking cosmic justice. She was not a philosophical avenger righting the wrongs of the universe. She was a highly functioning clinical sociopath who killed not out of passion, but out of profound, chilling boredom and a deep-seated need to exert absolute control over the fragile mechanics of human life. She arrived at the Boston house at 8 p.m. on Saturday, slipping through the shadows of the affluent, silent neighborhood with the practiced ease of a phantom. The side door of the garage was unlocked. Exactly as Arthur had promised, she moved through the dark, cavernous space, bypassing the luxury vehicles, and picked the internal lock to the mudroom in under 30 seconds. She was dressed entirely in black, her hair pulled tightly back, wearing thin, surgical-grade gloves. She carried a suppressed, small-caliber pistol and a heavy, weighted garrote. She preferred the garrote. It was intimate. It was silent. It required a physical dominance that she found deeply, psychologically satisfying. She moved through the massive, silent house, memorizing the layout, checking the sight lines. The house was a monument to excessive wealth, filled with expensive, fragile things. She found Eleanor in the master bedroom on the second floor. Miranda stood in the darkened hallway, watching to the partially open door. Eleanor was sitting in a massive mirrored vanity, brushing her blonde hair, wearing a silk robe. She was beautiful, yes, but was a shallow, vacuous beauty. Miranda felt absolutely nothing looking at her. No pity, no anger, just the cold, mechanical assessment of a target. She checked her watch. 9:45 p.m. Julian would be arriving soon. The plan was to wait for him to enter the bedroom, to let them engage, and then to eliminate them both in a moment of maximum vulnerability. But as Miranda stood in the shadows, waiting for the trap to spring, she heard the sound of front door opening downstairs. It was early. Julian wasn't supposed to arrive for another 15 minutes. Miranda frowned, a microscopic tightening of the muscles around her eyes. She retreated into the darkness of the guest bedroom across the hall, leaving the door cracked just enough to monitor the stairs. She heard heavy footsteps ascending the hardwood staircase, but it wasn't the slow, cautious tread of a secret lover sneaking into a house. It was heavy, confident, and entirely too loud. A man crested the landing. It was Julian, the contractor. He wasn't trying to be quiet. He walked directly into the master bedroom. Miranda listened intently, waiting for the hushed, urgent whispers of lovers. Instead, what she heard sent a cold, sharp spike of genuine surprise through her highly calibrated nervous system. "Did he get on a flight?" Julian asked, his voice harsh, completely stripped of any romantic pretense. "Yes," Eleanor replied, her voice equally cold, the soft, pampered tone entirely gone. "I checked the airline app on his iPad. He scanned his boarding pass at Logan. He's in Chicago." "Good," Julian said. Miranda heard the sound of a heavy bag being dropped onto the hardwood floor. "Because I brought the tools. We need to make sure the wiring in the new sunroom looks like a legitimate electrical fault. The fire investigator needs to see a completely fried junction box." Miranda froze in the shadows of the guest room. They weren't meeting for a romantic rendezvous. They were planning an arson. "Are you absolutely sure the accelerant won't leave a chemical signature?" Eleanor asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "If they find traces of gasoline, the insurance company will void the policy, and the police will open a homicide investigation." "It's not gasoline," Julian scoffed. "It's a specialized chemical compound I got from a demolition site. It burns at 3,000 degrees and consumes itself entirely. By the time the fire department gets here, this entire wing of the house will be ashed. When Arthur comes home tomorrow night, the structural integrity of the floorboards above the sunroom will be compromised. I've pre-cut the joists." The sheer, breathtaking reality of their conversation crystallized in Miranda's mind. Arthur thought he was the architect of a murder. He thought he was outsmarting his cheating wife, but he was completely, pathetically oblivious. Eleanor and Julian weren't just plotting a divorce. They were plotting a fatal accident. They were going to burn the house down while Arthur was sleeping, making it look like a tragic electrical fire caused by the ongoing renovations. They were going to kill him, collect a massive life insurance policy, and walk away clean. Miranda stood in the dark, a slow, chilling smile spreading across her face. The irony was exquisite. 3 people, all circling each other in the dark, all secretly planning to murder each other. It was a psychological masterpiece, a tangle of betrayal so dense and beautiful that it almost felt like art. Arthur had hired a sociopath to kill his wife, completely unaware that his wife had already hired her lover to kill him. The parameters of the mission had fundamentally changed. Miranda was no longer an assassin carrying out a contract. She was a wild card, an apex predator standing in the middle of a trap designed for someone else. She could walk away. She could leave them to their arson, let Arthur burn and disappear into the night. But Miranda didn't walk away. She stepped out of the shadows of the guest room, drawing the suppressed pistol from her jacket, and walked silently across the hall toward the master bedroom. The game had just become infinitely more interesting, and she had absolutely no intention of missing the finale. There is a profound, terrifying silence that occurs right before a sudden act of extreme violence. It is as if the universe holds its breath, the ambient noise of the world dropping away to make room for the horrific sound of tearing flesh and shattering reality. Miranda stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, the suppressed pistol hanging casually at her side, watching the 2 amateur murderers finalize their arson plot. Julian was kneeling on the floor, pulling heavy, coiled wires and small, unmarked canisters from his canvas duffel bag. Eleanor was standing by the window, nervously biting her thumbnail, her beautiful face distorted by a mixture of greed and terror. "We need to set the charges near the main load-bearing beam," Julian was saying, entirely focused on his grim task. "It has to look like the fire originated from the faulty wiring." "Hello, Eleanor," Miranda said. Her voice was smooth, quiet, and carried the deadly, unshakable calm of an executioner. Eleanor whipped around, a sharp, ragged gasp tearing from her throat. Julian froze, his hands hovering over the duffel bag, his eyes snapping toward the doorway. The confusion on their faces was absolute. They were anticipating a fire, perhaps a nosy neighbor, but they were entirely unprepared for a woman in black standing in their sanctuary holding a firearm. "Who the hell are you?" Julian demanded, the shock instantly mutating into aggressive, territorial anger. He began to stand up, his muscles tensing for a confrontation. "Sit down, Julian," Miranda commanded, raising the pistol just an inch, the black muzzle aligning perfectly with the center of his chest. The gesture was minimal, but the lethal authority behind it was absolute. Julian froze, recognizing the cold, dead emptiness in her eyes. He slowly sank back onto his heels. "What do you want?" Eleanor stammered, backing away until she hit the edge of the vanity, her hands gripping the marble edge so tightly her knuckles turned white. "If you want money, my husband's safe is downstairs. The combination is—" "I don't want your money, Eleanor," Miranda interrupted, stepping fully into the room, maintaining a flawless tactical distance from both of them. "I want to talk about the sunroom. Specifically, I want to talk about the pre-cut joists and the chemical accelerant you were just discussing." The color drained completely from Eleanor's face, leaving her skin a sickly, translucent white. Julian's jaw clenched, his eyes darting frantically toward the heavy metal wrench resting in his open duffel bag. "You're out of your mind," Julian lied, his voice gravelly and forced. "We're talking about standard renovation materials. Who sent you? Did Arthur send you? Did he hire a private investigator?" "Arthur thinks you're having an affair," Miranda said, her lips curving into a terrifying, humorless smile. "Arthur thinks he is a betrayed, pathetic husband who hired a stranger in an airport bar to kill his cheating wife. Arthur is sitting in a steakhouse in Chicago right now, obsessively checking his burner phone, waiting for me to tell him that his problem is solved. He has absolutely no idea that his problem is actively trying to burn him alive for his life insurance." The revelation hit them with the force of a physical blow. The intricate, secret architecture of their murder plot had been effortlessly dismantled by a ghost. He hired you?" Eleanor whispered, absolute horror dawning in her eyes. The realization that the mild-mannered, predictable man she had planned to murder had actually struck first paralyzed her. "Arthur hired someone to kill me?" "He did," Miranda confirmed cheerfully. "But frankly, after hearing your little arson plan, I find your operation incredibly sloppy. An electrical fire? Pre-cut joists? It's amateur hour. The fire marshal would have found the accelerant residue. The insurance company would have stalled the payout. You both would have been indicted for conspiracy and murder within 6 months. I'm actually doing you a favor." Julian didn't wait for her to finish. He was a man accustomed to physical labor, relying on brute strength to solve problems. He lunged. He exploded upward from his kneeling position, a roar tearing from his throat, diving across the floor toward the heavy metal wrench in his bag. It was a fatal, pathetic miscalculation. Miranda didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. She simply tracked his movement with the cold, mechanical precision of a tracking system. As Julian's hand closed around the handle of the wrench, Miranda squeezed the trigger. The suppressed gunshot sounded like a sharp, violent hand clap in an enclosed room. The bullet struck Julian directly in the center of his forehead. The kinetic energy of the impact snapped his head backward violently. He collapsed onto the hardwood floor, instantly and permanently dead, the heavy wrench clattering harmlessly away from his lifeless fingers. A dark, rapidly expanding pool of blood began to seep into the expensive Persian rug. Eleanor screamed. It was a high, piercing, sustained shriek of absolute, primal terror. She stared at the dead body of her lover, the reality of the violence shattering her mind. She turned, desperate, animalistic panic taking over, and scrambled toward the heavy oak door leading to the en-suite bathroom. Miranda sighed, a soft sound of mild irritation. She raised a pistol. Tracking the fleeing woman, she fired twice. The first bullet shattered Eleanor's collarbone, spinning her violently around. The second bullet struck her in the throat, silencing the scream instantly. Eleanor crumpled to the floor, her hands flying to her neck, choking on her own blood, her eyes wide and staring in absolute, suffocating terror at the woman standing over her. Miranda walked slowly across the room, her boots stepping carefully over the spreading blood. She stood over Eleanor, watching the life rapidly fade from her eyes. There was no grand speech. There was no villainous monologue. Miranda simply watched the mechanical process of death with a clinical, detached fascination. When Eleanor finally went still, Miranda carefully holstered the pistol. The room smelled of copper, cordite, and lavender. She had completed the contract. She had also eliminated the threat to the client. But as she looked at the two bodies, a new, far more interesting problem presented itself. Arthur thought he was paying for a clean, staged break-in. He was expecting the police to find his wife murdered by an unknown intruder. But now, there were two bodies and an open duffel bag full of arson equipment. The narrative had changed. The police wouldn't see a random break-in. They would see a lover's quarrel, a murder-suicide, or worse, a conspiracy that had violently imploded. Miranda smiled. The messy, chaotic reality of human behavior was so wonderfully unpredictable. She pulled her burner phone from her pocket and dialed Arthur's number. She had a new script to write, and her unwitting accomplice in Chicago was going to have to play the lead role exactly as she directed, or he was going to burn right alongside them. The vibration of the burner phone in my pocket felt like an electric shock. I was sitting in my hotel room in Chicago, staring at the muted television, the adrenaline and terror having long since curdled into a nauseating physical illness. The digital clock on the nightstand read 2:14 a.m. The deed was done. The irrevocable line had been crossed. My wife was dead. I pulled the phone from my pocket, my hand shaking so violently I could barely press the answer button. "It's done," I whispered into the receiver, expecting the cold, professional confirmation of the woman from the airport bar. "Arthur." Miranda's voice echoed through the speaker. It wasn't cold. It was terrifyingly amused. "We have experienced a slight deviation from the original itinerary." My stomach plummeted. The walls of the hotel room seemed to close in instantly. "What do you mean? What happened? Is she..." "She is deceased, yes," Miranda interrupted smoothly. "But I have some rather shocking news regarding your wife, Arthur. It turns out that Eleanor and her handsome contractor were not just planning to break your heart. They were planning to burn you alive. Literally. I walked in on them prepping the house for an arson. They had chemical accelerants. They had pre-cut the joists above the sunroom. They were going to kill you for the insurance money." The revelation hit me with the force of a freight train. The breath left my lungs in a violent rush. I fell back on the hotel bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. They were going to kill me. The betrayal hadn't just been sexual. It had been utterly, profoundly lethal. The nagging, pathetic guilt I had been harboring for hiring a hitman instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold, blinding terror. "Are you still there, Arthur?" Miranda asked. "I'm here." I gasped, my mind struggling to process the sheer magnitude of conspiracy. If they were there together, what did you do? "I improvised," she said simply. "I killed them both." "You killed Julian?" I shouted, scrambling up from the bed, the panic returning with absolute ferocity. That wasn't the plan. 2 bodies? A double homicide? The police will tear my life apart. They'll see through the break-in narrative immediately. "Arthur, calm down," Miranda commanded, the sharp edge of authority slicing through my hysteria. "You need to listen to me very carefully, because your survival depends entirely on your ability to follow directions. I am not going to stage a break-in. I am going to stage a murder-suicide." I listened, paralyzed by the horrific brilliance of her new narrative. "I have arranged the scene," Miranda explained, her voice steady and clinical. "Julian's fingerprints are on the weapon. Eleanor's blood is on his clothes. The arson equipment is clearly visible. When the police arrive, they will see a tragic, violent implosion of a criminal conspiracy. They will conclude that the lovers had a catastrophic argument while prepping the house to murder you. Julian shot Eleanor in a fit of rage and then turned the gun on himself. You are no longer the grieving victim of a random home invasion. You are the tragic, oblivious husband who narrowly escaped being murdered by his treacherous wife and her psychotic lover." It was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation. She hadn't just solved the problem of the double homicide. She weaponized it to create an impenetrable alibi for me. I would be the ultimate victim. The police wouldn't look at me as a suspect. They would look at me with profound sympathy. It's perfect," I stammered, the terror slowly mutating into a sick, twisted sense of awe. I was bound to a monster, but the monster was brilliantly competent. "It is," Miranda agreed. "Now you will stay in Chicago. You will not return early. Tomorrow morning, you will call the house. When Eleanor doesn't answer, you will call your neighbor and ask them to check on the property. They will find the bodies. You will act completely, utterly devastated. You will cooperate fully with the authorities. And Arthur, yes, do not ever, under any circumstances, attempt to contact me again. The burner phone goes into the Chicago River tonight. Our transaction is complete. You have your life back. Try not to waste it. The line went dead. The silence in the hotel room was absolute. I was free. The parasites were gone. I walked over to the window, staring out at the glittering lights of Chicago's skyline. A profound, chilling numbness settling over my soul. I had crossed the threshold. I had orchestrated a murder, discovered a plot against my own life, and survived entirely by the grace of a sociopath I met in an airport bar. The next 3 months played out exactly as Miranda had predicted. The neighbor found the bodies. The police launched a massive investigation. I flew back to Boston, playing the role of the shattered, traumatized husband with an authenticity that terrified me. The detectives found the arson equipment. They uncovered the emails between Eleanor and Julian. The narrative of the lovers' quarrel ending in a murder-suicide was adopted by the authorities and the media without a single question. I was cleared of any suspicion within weeks. The massive life insurance policy I held on Eleanor was paid out. I sold the house in the suburbs, the house that had been a tomb, a trap, and a slaughterhouse, and moved into a high-security penthouse in the city. I had gotten away with it, the perfect crime. But the human mind is not designed to carry the weight of an unpunished sin forever. The isolation that followed the murders was absolute. I couldn't look at my friends, my colleagues, without wondering what they would do if they knew the truth. I couldn't sleep without the aid of heavy prescription sedatives. The phantom smell of cordite and lavender haunting my dreams. I had traded the prison of a toxic marriage for the prison of my own psychological terror. And then, exactly 6 months after the murders, a letter arrived at my penthouse. It was a heavy, cream-colored envelope. No return address. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single blank piece of heavy cardstock and a newspaper clipping. The clipping was from a local paper in a small town in upstate New York. It detailed the tragic, unsolved murder of a wealthy businessman who had allegedly died in a hunting accident. Written across the bottom of the clipping, in a smooth, elegant, terrifyingly familiar handwriting, were 3 words. I missed you. The blood completely drained from my face. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow, driving me to my knees on the cold hardwood floor of my luxury penthouse. Miranda wasn't gone. Our transaction wasn't complete. She wasn't a vigilante taking out the trash. She was a predator who had found the perfect, wealthy, terrified accomplice. She had orchestrated the perfect crime in Boston, not to free me, but to bind me to her permanently. I was an accessory to a double homicide. She possessed the burner phone records. She possessed the knowledge that could destroy my life instantly. I hadn't escaped the trap. I had simply upgraded the cage. I was tethered to a monster, waiting in the dark for her next set of instructions, knowing with absolute, horrifying certainty that the next person she decided was a kind worth killing might just be me. And that is the terrifying, nerve-shredding reality of the kind worth killing. A story that proves the most dangerous threats don't lurk in dark alleyways or abandoned buildings. They sit right next to you in crowded airport bars, ordering dry martinis, waiting for you to confess your darkest secrets. Arthur thought he was the architect of murder, but he was nothing more than a pawn in a game played by a mastermind who viewed human life as a logistical puzzle. If that final, chilling letter made your blood run cold, if the realization that Arthur built his own permanent psychological prison keeps you awake tonight, then you are exactly where you belong. You are a moon whisperer. Do not scroll away. Look down at that subscribe button. It is the only thing standing between you and the monsters hiding in plain sight. Click it. Join us. We dissect the darkest, most twisted thrillers ever written, bringing the psychological madness directly to your headphones. And that bell icon, ring it, because the next story I have for you involves a woman who realizes her perfect, charming new husband is systematically erasing her entire identity, and no one believes her. You absolutely do not want to miss it. Hit the like button if you think Arthur got exactly what he deserved for crossing the line. Hit the like button if Miranda's cold, calculated brilliance absolutely terrified you. Let the algorithm know we want more dark, complex thrillers. I have one final question for you, a true test of your own morality. Tell me in the comments below, if a stranger in an airport offered to permanently solve your biggest problem with zero consequences, would you walk away or would you keep listening? Be completely honest. I will be reading every single answer. I'm Friend, and remember, the next time a stranger buys you a drink and asks about your life, lie, good night, and watch your back.